We're now getting to nearly our final panel, but it's a very exciting panel because for one reason we have a UN independent expert on the promotion of democratic and equitable order, which is a very important issue for the Alliance for Democracy in Laos. But we also have a very important initiative that is also being promoted, the Global Bill of Rights, which will be very crucial as well for Laos and for Alliance for Democracy as you try to, in many ways, fight for the rights in this document to be able to see how legally we'll be able to do things. So it's quite crucial and important. We have copies that we can distribute as well. So this in a way is a very important step. It's the implementation really of Article 28 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but also with a special procedure, which Mark was just talking about, that's actually working on a daily basis and just returned from the UN General Assembly last month, where he's speaking to the General Assembly on this important issue. So I'd like to introduce Alfred to Zayas, but we'll also have Kirk, a professor formerly at UC Berkeley, but also a practicing attorney focusing on human rights, who will Skype in from San Francisco. So it's an exciting last panel, but it's a way to be able to show how we can use technology to be able to include everyone to have this discussion. So I'll start with Alfred, and then we'll have Kirk coming in this way.
Thank you, Joshua, and good afternoon, everybody. We got plenty of copies of this brochure of the Global Bill of Rights. And I want every one of you to take one, read it. There's a pledge that you endorse the idea of a Global Bill of Rights. You don't have to endorse the exact text that we have here. This is work in progress. So as a matter of fact, we invite you to communicate with us and tell us how you would like a Global Bill of Rights to look at. And go on the website www.uniteforrights.com. There you will find the pledge, and then we can interact in the future. But before I launch into Article 28 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and this project of the Global Bill of Rights, at least you should know whom you're dealing with. Now, for 25 years, I worked as a lawyer for the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Actually, it used to be called the Division on Human Rights and then the Center. And I was head of petitions, meaning I was responsible for the individual complaints to the Human Rights Committee, to the Committee Against Torture, to the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, etc. And I was also chief of the, I was also secretary of the Human Rights Committee. Now, I've been recycled into a different function. I am now an independent expert. I am officially retired from the United Nations as a staff member, and I am now an independent expert who reports to the Human Rights Council and to the General Assembly. I have already presented 4 reports to the Human Rights Council, 4 different reports to the General Assembly. I have issued certainly 30, if not more, press releases and media statements. They're all on the website of the United Nations. There are opinion pieces and there are articles and other things on the website that deal with this enormous mandate that I was given. Imagine independent expert on the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order. That is the convergence of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. It's everything. And the Council gives me full freedom to determine priorities and to choose the topics I want to focus on. This year, the report to the Council was on the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and other multilateral free trade and investment agreements. My report to the General Assembly was on the adverse human rights impacts from experience of 25 years investor-state dispute settlement mechanism and the arbitral awards issued by these arbitrators. For 2016, I'm preparing a report on the World Trade Organization and its impact on the international order, in particular the adverse human rights impacts, especially in the field of agriculture, as you may or may not know, through trade agreements and through globalization and through dumping of cheap agricultural products, usually subsidized agricultural products in the West. The agricultural sector of many countries like Ghana have been devastated. In India, there have been 300,000 suicides among farmers whose livelihoods have been destroyed. So this is a genuine problem. You don't hear much about it. It doesn't hit the headlines, but it is true. If you had participated in the WTO public forum back 6 weeks ago, I was on 3 of their panels, you would have learned the problems that poor farmers are facing as a result of these globalized rules. Now, my mandate ends in 2018. I am doing a report on WTO for the Council and on tax havens and tax evasion for the General Assembly. Because obviously you're not going to be able to implement the sustainable development goals if the great corporations and the super rich do not pay taxes. And that is a major problem of tax evasion worldwide. I think it's a priority to do away with tax havens worldwide. Now, as far as the special procedures, my predecessor, Mark Lemon, gave you a good introduction into the Human Rights Council and its special procedures. On the one hand, the thematic mandates. I have a thematic mandate. And on the other hand, the country mandates. I would like to indicate that the thematic mandates, unlike the country mandates, are more preventive in their impact. And we try to look into the root causes of human rights violations. We are not into naming and shaming and pointing fingers at countries. We want to help countries improve their human rights performance and give them advisory services and technical assistance when it's necessary to improve their constitutions, to improve their laws, to improve the administration of justice, to train judges and lawyers, etc., and in disseminating information about rights, because it's indispensable that everyone, whether Laotian or Vietnamese or Cambodian or American or South African, know their rights and know how to claim them. Now, the special procedures have indeed grown, but unlike what our friend Mark said, I personally think that we don't have enough special procedures, that we don't have enough special rapporteurs. For the last 3 years, I have been advocating the creation of a new rapporteurship on the right to privacy. To my delight, the mandate was finally established half a year ago, And now we have a special rapporteur on the right to privacy. I mentioned the right to privacy because in the light of the huge surveillance that is taking place today in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in France, etc., etc., there has been an erosion of democracy, and many of my colleagues, rapporteurs, including Ben Emerson, the rapporteur on terrorism, and David Kay, the rapporteur on freedom of expression, and Mina Kai, the rapporteur on freedom of peaceful assembly and association, have issued press releases and media statements condemning the surveillance and the paranoia that goes with it. So going back to what I said, a rapporteur on the issue of the right to identity, the right to privacy, the right to home and family is an important advance. Now, finally, moving to our global Bill of Rights. Our goal is that every lawyer and every judge and every citizen has a global Bill of Rights, and that he can take it out of his pocket and say, I am invoking Article 23. I am invoking my right to privacy. I am invoking my right to freedom of expression. Now, the hierarchy of rights, if you want to call it that, or the order in which the rights have been listed in this booklet, is Kirk's decision, his idea. There he is, Kirk. Howdy, Kirk. But we start with human dignity. Article 1 reads, human dignity is the source of all human rights, and every person can enforce in court the rights stated herein, whether they are in their homeland or any foreign land. Now, from here, we move on to a list of civil rights, economic rights, cultural rights, social rights. So you see, there is this interrelatedness and interdependence of all human rights, and the bottom line is that we want them enforced. We don't want to have just a text, not yet another codification. We want to have an enforceable document. And back in 2009, we had a very successful conference at Berkeley Law School in San Francisco. The first High Commissioner for Human Rights, Jose Ayala Lasso, the acting High Commissioner on Human Rights, Bertram Ramcharan, the United Nations Rapporteur on Torture, Professor Manfred Novak, Professor David Caron, the President of the American Society of International Law, were all there, and we advanced on the idea of adopting a statute for a world court on human rights. Now, a world court on human rights would be, if you want, the highest appeal instance in the field of human rights, and its decisions must be binding and enforceable, as indeed the decisions of the European Court of Human Rights. The decisions of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights are binding and enforceable. And this is one initiative that we are all pushing. We want to strengthen the regional systems of dispute settlement. We want a stronger African court on human and people's rights. We want a stronger Inter-American court on human rights, etc. But this is a long-term project, and we need, of course, civil society to support it. We need lawyers in every single country endorsing this idea of the global Bill of Rights and endorsing this idea of making rights enforceable. Now, the concept of the rule of law is one that we have been working on for the last 200 years. I mean, since the French Revolution, since the American Revolution, there has been a concerted effort away from arbitrariness, away from absolutism, away from authoritarianism, away from totalitarianism, and trying to say, these are the laws, and the courts are independent, and the courts will apply the law independently. There are, however, threats to this system of the rule of law, and we have to be aware of the threats and we have to address them. One of the threats, which I deal with in my reports to the General Assembly and to the Human Rights Council, is this privatized system of dispute settlement that has been created over the last 25 years in order to arbitrate economic disputes. Now, if this was just a simple commercial matter, it wouldn't really matter. The problem is that it has galloped away. These arbitrators are telling states, if you raise the minimum wage, you will have to pay me money because I will make less profit. So the ontology of business has been changed. The businessman doesn't have to take risks anymore. The state is supposed to guarantee the profit of the businesses, and if the government says, well, I have to adopt legislation to protect the environment, or I will prohibit the disposal of toxic waste, or I will double check whether the patents of this pharmaceutical are okay, then obviously the business is going to make less money. But that is the very nature of doing business, that you take a risk, and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. And the ontology of the state, the nature of the state, the raison d'etre of the state, is to legislate in the public interest. And we're having now, through this system of investor-state dispute settlement, nothing less than a frontal attack on democracy. We're having a frontal attack on the sovereignty of a state, on the regulatory space of a state. And the state is obliged under Article 28 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to create an environment in which all human rights can be enjoyed. But we, under Article 29, also have a duty, not only rights. We have a duty to serve society. And corporations, investors also have this same duty to serve society. They are making a profit because society created a market that allowed them to make a profit. So you see how everything is interrelated and how we want to make it all flow into one single document that would go beyond the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Don't forget, the Universal Declaration, as wonderful as this document is only a declaration. It's not a treaty. It is what we term soft law. It advanced from soft law into hard law in the form of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the International Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, etc., etc. So we want to do the same with the Declaration on the Right to Development. We want to have that as a convention. or the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. That should also be a convention, and it should be legally binding. And on this happy note, I leave you because I want to hear this man. I want to hear Kirk. Kirk is yours.
All right, so we'll introduce and bring Kirk in. Okay, so we're going to translate in one quick second, Kirk, into Laos, so that everybody is aware of everything that was just said by Alfred, and that gives you a second too to be ready to share as well. And if you want, I'll turn you around so you can see the people, but then you won't see us anymore, okay?
That's good. I would like
ขอไปสั้นๆเนาะเพราะว่าเพิ่นผู้นี้นี่เพิ่นเป็นทนายความสากลกินเบี้ยบำนาญแล้ว แต่ว่าเป็นผู้ที่ว่าเขียนเอกสารห้างบทสรุปกฎหมายต่างๆให้สหประชาชาติและทางสหประชาชาติให้ความเชื่อใจแก่เพิ่นตัดสินปัญหาตามคำเสนอของเพิ่นหลายอย่าง เพิ่นผู้นี้กำลังห้างกฎหมายสากลกฎหมายที่จะบังคับชาวโลกทุกๆประเทศทั่วโลกให้เป็นเอกสารที่ว่าอันเดียวกันตรงนี้นี่ห้างออกมาตรงนี้สำคัญหลายมันจะมีข้อความเด่นเพราะว่าผ่านมานี่เรียกซาบะซ่ามีกันบ้างมีอย่างระเบิดก็เอามาเว้ากันรัฐบาลประเทศไปเว้าไปว่ามาบ่แก้อย่างใดฉะนั้นจำเป็นต้องมีกฎหมายทั่วโลกนี่ใช้อันเดียวกันแล้วการแก้ไขปัญหาบ่แม่นเว้ากันซื่อมันต้องฟ้องกันขึ้นศาลต้องใช้ระบบนั้นและเราจึงว่าเห็นมีความสำคัญหลายท่านผู้นี้มีความสำคัญหลายสำหรับพวกเราข้าพเจ้าจึงอยากขอให้พวกท่านเข้าใจดีขอเชิญเราต่อ Thank you
Okay, Kirk, the exciting thing is you're on now, and in a way it's exciting because we've talked about a lot of declarations, we've talked a lot about the international mechanisms, both of treaty bodies, but also the special procedures, and we're also at an exciting point, I think, Kirk, to even point out next year will be the anniversary of the Twin Covenants, so it's a great time as well, strategically for us to raise the Global Bill of Rights, and now I'll open the floor and you can speak to the entire group, which you can see in the video, I think, right now. I'll give you the whole spectrum of the room. Please, Kirk, from San Francisco.
Great, Joshua. It's a real pleasure, and good evening or late afternoon to all of you. First, I just have a couple of things that I would like to start with. I'm only going to make 3 points. You all have been in this conference for some time. I'm hoping that we can actually have some questions in follow-up to what Alfred has just said and the few remarks that I have. Now, the first point that I'd like to make is I'd like to say thank you to Joshua in particular and to all of you for being there. I don't think that there's a better title for our presentation in this part of the conference than the fulfillment of Article 28. You know, many times when I speak, I don't talk about Article 28 because people are not aware of the particular articles in the Universal Declaration. But here we have a room full of people who understand the UDHR and its history. So I'm not going to go through the entire history, but just that emphasis on Article 28, it really does foresee the moment where we are right now. And Article 28 is, and Unite for Rights, our organization, the Global Bill of Rights that you have there on your desk. Alfred, I'm assuming everybody, and Joshua, I'm assuming everybody's been given a copy of our booklet. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay, good. So when they passed Article 28, they foresaw that there was going to need to be additional documents, right? That Hearst Lauterpacht and others saw that there was a real deficiency in just a declaration, but they realized that in the future there would be the moment that we have now, following on all the covenants and the rest, where we can have a single document that we can focus on together that can be enforceable in the courts of all countries. So that's my first point, is that thank you, Joshua. I think you picked a great topic. And Article 28 really is what our organization, Unite for Rights, is all about. It's the fulfillment of the UDHR. The second, I just want to follow up on what Alfred has said. And again, I really appreciate this particular group because I think that you all have the background to realize the 2 different paths that are being taken since the Universal Declaration and the fulfillment of Article 28. On the one hand, you have the covenants, which are great. we're big supporters of the Twin Covenants, and next year will be a big event to celebrate them, and the other documents as well. But there's a parallel track, and that's the regional courts. And I think we should all take a moment to reflect on the European Convention on Human Rights, and in particular, one person who I feel is one of the great leaders in human rights history, who's not always given a lot of attention, and that's René Cassin. Because when they moved into the European Convention, and you look at the European Convention, which is truly the best protection for human rights in the world today, and the UN's doing great work. I love the committees. Alfred was the general counsel for one. And they're crucial. But at the same time, this parallel track, you go into the European Court, you see these judges from 47 countries, and it's an astounding thing. I really hope that all of you will also take a moment to look at the video on the Council of Europe website and get a sense of the regional development. Because this is something that I think that Unite really has to offer as well. And Alfred in particular has expertise. I'm glad that he mentioned this, is that these regional courts, there's a reason why it says in the European Convention that this is the, quote, next steps after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, okay? And so we can be in favor of these various conventions at the UN and still recognize that there need to be more steps towards the regional courts. And then we have a wonderful model to follow. The third point that I want to make, and this is really a request of all of you there, I know it's late in the day, and you're looking at a guy up on Skype, and that's not easy to follow, but what I want you to think about is that if you go to our website, and I'm not sure if Joshua has brought this up earlier, but it's really easy to remember, uniteforrights.org. This is the reason that we're doing this, and Joshua, can you help me out here? What I'd like to do is to have everyone look at the booklet together and look at the. That's good. I can see the gentleman in the front is. If you look at, thank you. Now look at the logo there. Do you see the three figures? You see, it's really a beautiful logo that's been done for us in San Francisco. Right. And so the three figures, they represent people, individuals, businesses, and governments. And so when you look at that little logo there, what we're really trying to do is get everyone to focus together. So the third thing that I would ask you all to do, and I believe that many of you already have, is that if you will go to our website, you'll see there's a button there where you can pledge to support the idea of a global Bill of Rights. Okay, so we're not saying that we have a perfect Bill of Rights, and I think Alfred made that clear to you. I want to reinforce that. We have a list. We have a great starting point. And with all that work that was done back in 2009 and the other years, we have something that's worthy of being on the table in front of you all. Something that's worthy of you looking at and thinking about what you would want. What would you put in there? How would you fulfill the vision of Article 28 through something that's enforceable? They made the right choice by going forward with the declaration, even though it wasn't enforceable. But they knew that the moment would come, where we are right now, where we would have an enforceable document. So I hope that you'll go to the website, that you'll click on that orange pledge button, and just sign that simple pledge that does nothing more than, I pledge to support the idea of a global Bill of Rights. And with that, those are my three thoughts. I really would like to open it up to any comments or suggestions that anyone there in the audience has to make. And thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you for listening to someone talking on Skype.
No problem, Kirk. That's one of the ways that we thought we could work to communicate globally, is using the technology to advance human rights, and not just for corporations to make profits, but for, more importantly, that we can all communicate and coordinate. So we're going to open it up to questions now, Kirk. I'll leave you facing the crowd so you get that sense.
Good.
And if there's any question you can hear, we'll say it to you so you get it. But now we have questions for you and Alfred to look at the Global Bill of Rights based on the community's issues and concerns.
Great.
Okay. Any questions? I think we have Buton in the front. She.
With all due respect to your effort and your work, we recognize it is hard work long ahead. The question that our president has for you too is, how long does it take? It will become a law that we can, the world can enjoy and implement it in just this way? That's the question. Can you give us that time frame?
Well, I think that the one thing is that if you look now at the regional courts, that there is justice being done now in the European Court. And so I realize that it's going to, and the Inter-American Court, or Commission, Inter-American Commission, they're making decisions. And the African Court, it's underway as well. If Joshua could speak about the ASEAN Court and the Asian Court, it's just beginning it and its development, and it's going to take some time. But the truth is, in order for things to be expedited, and this is why we have the pledge, is that it's going to take a social movement. It's going to take all three of those figures in order to push things forward so that there's better protections today. These regional courts are going to need to have the show of support for the idea of a global Bill of Rights in order to continue to have public pressure and have them grow. But I would say that there are some courts that are underway that are doing justice now, but it'll take more time. Perhaps, Joshua, you'd like to mention about what you personally observed with the ASEAN developments?
Sure. So I think many people in the room have also started to participate in ASEAN. One of the reasons we began to participate in ASEAN is it's still new. The European Court of Human Rights that Kirk is referring to is much more advanced. The good news about it is there's a ruling in Strasbourg, where many of the people in the room actually came from and drove, then it would be implemented in the country. ASEAN, we know, is a little bit further behind. But one important aspect of also meeting in 2015 is, at the end of this year, they're announcing ASEAN will move and take the next steps to be like the European Union. And while they're focusing on economics, what we encourage them is to also think about equality and equity and our earth. So it's not just economics that ASEAN should come together on, but they can't leave out the people. They can't leave out, when they're talking about movement of goods, to forget the most important issue is it's about people. If you look at the UN Charter, it's we the people. So ASEAN is still in its infancy stage. ASEAN now just has an ASEAN Commission on Human Rights. And even this year, they just created, for the first time, that NGOs can now apply to participate. So we can see it's decades behind, but many people thought Africa wouldn't move quickly, and many people thought Inter-American wouldn't move quickly. But we see many important cases, especially in Inter-American, with indigenous people's rights that are very profound for people in the region of the Americas. So ASEAN will move very rapidly, so it's important for us to be prepared to be able to participate. So one of the aspects that Kirk is describing is each region will have to work together, and you can be a major player in ASEAN to make sure that human rights is at the forefront. But there's even groups farther behind ASEAN. The Pacific was recently in Fiji. The Pacific doesn't even have a regional commission or a court or a Pacific charter. So ASEAN at least has a charter and at least has an ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. We would hope in the future it'd have a court. So in all of our work, it depends on organizing where we are now and what we need. So it's not one or the other. It's not an either or. What I think Kirk is describing, it's an and both. That if we're looking today, it's the UN Charter 70th anniversary. It's also the 67th anniversary of the UDHR. It's also the 10th anniversary next year of this new UN Human Rights Council that we've talked about today. It's also the new Sustainable Development Goals that will start again in less than 30 days as the MDGs conclude. And as they're meeting in Paris right now and will continue for the next week until the 11th, it's also important that they're having a global agreement of humanity on how we're going to live together on this planet. So, as Kirk talked about 4 freedoms in his book of Roosevelt, but also the 5th one, including the environment, what this Global Bill of Rights is trying to do is say, we need to look at the regional, but we also need to have the architecture of an international institution that was referred to by Alfred as a World Court of Human Rights, so that if something's going wrong inside Laos, you don't just wait, but you have a mechanism at the top. But we also have these mechanisms of special procedures now and regional bodies that we should utilize as often as possible to defend the human rights of your family and friends who work daily to struggle against the oppression. If that's okay, Kirk.
That's great. Let's get another question. I agree.
Any other questions? Yes.
The question is that now since we met in Geneva, this is the 2nd day already. Our participants come from all over the world, from New Zealand, Australia, that far, from Canada, from USA, from France, European, Spain. It's on the same cause, same reason we have a concern about human rights in Laos. And the question we have is the model, the law, the system, the law model that you are proposing, you are working, your team is working now, is a dream for us. The question is when the law can be implemented in Laos or in that part of the world.
Well, yeah, I think you might hear from Alfred in that it's important when you talk about that, as Joshua meant, that there's a parallel track here. So you have existing systems that are really quite strong, and Alfred can talk with you about how, with the Human Rights Committee, that there are things that can be done right now where you can address the violations of human rights. And I think those are positive steps to take. At the same time, it makes sense in parallel to also be signing the pledge and supporting the idea of strengthening the court systems even within Laos. It should be real clear to everyone there that our vision at the end of the Unite for Rights and with this Global Bill of Rights is that rights are enforceable in the local courts of all countries, okay? Not just that you have to, in the United States or in Germany or in any other place where there's an established court system that works properly, you can go and get an order from the local judge. And so that's our vision, is that we're really working towards the local enforcement at the end of this process. That's the vision. Since that structure is not in place right now, it is worthwhile to do things like go to the Human Rights Committee. And Alfred, perhaps you could tell them how they could take immediate steps. I don't know if this has been addressed earlier today or not.
The Human Rights Committee has a procedure to examine individual cases. And not every country is a state party to this procedure. There are 167 states parties to the covenant, and there are 115 states parties to its optional protocol. The optional protocol and the covenant entered into force 50 years ago. And, or I take that back, 40 years ago. They were adopted 50 years ago. And as the case may be, what's important is that although decisions of the Human Rights Committee are not eo ipso binding. They are seen as recommendations. On the other hand, we have scored very significant successes, and governments have implemented our decisions. We have numerous governments that have changed their legislation as a direct result of a decision of the Human Rights Committee. Governments that have reinstated functionaries who had been, especially during military juntas, who had been dismissed. We have governments that have done away with the death penalty or have granted commutation of sentence. We have governments that have refrained from expelling or deporting a person because that would have entailed exposing the person either to torture or to death. And we have a lot of jurisprudence with regard to indigenous peoples. I'll give you one example. The Hopu against France case. In that particular dispute, the indigenous population of an island in French Polynesia had its old cemeteries. And the concept of family for these Polynesians is that family encompasses their ancestors. And there was a hotel complex that was going to be built right on their cemetery. So they turned to the Human Rights Committee. And the committee found that building the hotel complex there would entail a violation of the family rights of these indigenous people and also a breach of their right to privacy. Happy end. The hotel complex was built elsewhere and the sacred lands of the indigenous were not touched. So you see that we can score successes, and the more successes we score, the greater the credibility of the system. But let me take advantage, now that I have the floor, to remind you, in the context of the 70th anniversary of the entry into force of the United Nations Charter, that with the United Nations Charter, we already have a world constitution. And we should use the world constitution to advance the 3 pillars of the United Nations, in particular this human rights pillar that Mark talked to us about. Now, when there is a conflict between any treaty, any agreement, any contract with any provision of the UN Charter, according to constitutional law, it is the United Nations Charter that prevails. That is Article 103 of the UN Charter. This is a rather underutilized article of the UN Charter, and it's about time, 70 years after the Charter entered into force, that we start using it. Because by virtue of Article 103 of the UN Charter, many treaties that are being abused and that are causing adverse effects on human rights can be declared invalid. And this is something that the International Court of Justice in The Hague could decide by way of an advisory opinion. And I have made a specific request to the General Assembly that it address a number of juridical questions to the International Court of Justice in order to obtain an advisory opinion, for instance, stating that the investor-state dispute settlement mechanism and that aspects of the bilateral investment treaties and the multilateral trade and investment agreements are contra bonos mores, meaning they are contrary to international public order, and as such are invalid. Article 53 of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. But the fact that I would say that, or my colleague Olivier de Schutter, the former rapporteur on the right to food, or the rapporteur on the right to health, or the rapporteur on foreign debt. Essentially, we all agree. But we are only special rapporteurs, and there is no implementation mechanism for our recommendations. If, however, the International Court of Justice comes down with a clear pronouncement that the UN Charter trumps all of these other agreements, that will strengthen the hand of governments in applying those other treaties in a manner that does not violate human rights. But this is something that only the International Court of Justice can do. We, rapporteurs, can create the momentum. But essentially the pronouncement must come from higher up. Thank you.
Joshua,
Yes, Kirk.
today I'd like to ask of the group there the same thing I'm asking every time I speak now. So I don't want you to feel singled out. But based upon the discussion that we've had here, I would like to know how many people in the room feel that they would be willing to sign a pledge saying they support the idea of a global Bill of Rights. And if you would raise your hand, then I would be able to see you from afar.
เราถามว่าวิธีฟ้องร้องเนี่ยนะคือบางหนึ่งตัวอย่างมาเปิดสัญญาวันที่18 กรกฎาคม 1977มันต้องฟ้องขึ้นศาลโลกเขาเจ้าว่าไงแต่ห้างกฎหมายวิธีฟ้องร้องแบบนี้นี่คนนั่งอยู่ห้องประชุมนี้ไม่ไผเห็นพ่อไม่ยกมือซะ
That's wonderful. That's a wonderful sight.
Basically everybody in the room.
Any of you who has a computer, open it up on the site of Unite for Rights. And all you have to do
If
is
it's
to
possible for you to take a picture
press
of
the
this,
button.
I just would like to dedicate this moment to Eleanor Roosevelt and all the others, PC Chang and the others that all worked together for this time when we would focus on taking their good work and making it enforceable in all countries. So thank you very much for that moment. I don't know how much more time we have, Joshua. I remain happy to answer any questions that anyone else has.
No problem. I know we're about to wrap up. We have a delicious dinner prepared. It's one of the most unique aspects of some of the speakers who came. They said, we've been in Geneva for many years and we've never seen an NGO cooking their own food outside before of a side event. So we've already transformed the poor sandwich diet and brought a more healthful, respectful right to food. So Deshuta will be very happy and definitely
I'm
under
sorry
the
to miss that.
Sustainable
I'll
Development
tell you.
Goals. We'll try to get something similar in San Francisco, but it looks pretty good.
Good. I'm sure it is.
All right, so if there's a final question or comment, I see one. And then I also want to thank you, Kirk, too, because I know it's early. And I know what it's like being in Hawaii and always having to wake up early for other people. So thank you, though, for your participation. And we'll take one more question, and then Alfred and Kirk can give closing comments. And then we'll figure out the rest of our evening.
Very good.
Hello?
Yep.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you very much Kirk and Alfred. Your presentation is very presenting clear and is very welcome news for us. Many of us here, all of us, I would say here, are mostly deprived of human rights people. So to hear something like this is very welcoming news. And thank you very much to come here and to tell us such a wonderful news such as it is. And I certainly will tell not just my colleague who are in this room, but my parents and my sibling, and in fact, people, my relative back in Laos, to go in and sign and click support this wonderful historic bill of global rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Joshua, I have just a short concluding remark and follow up to that. And my comment is
Sure,
this.
go ahead, Kirk.
I thank the gentleman there for considering his family and as well. Because I think one of the best things that Unite for Rights has to offer, and that's unique, that complements the other very fine work that's being done by all the different organizations that you've heard from today and that are represented there, is that we have something we can show that's positive. At a time when in the world people are constantly focusing on the negative and the divisiveness in the world, and that exists. You can't be in denial about that. But Unite for Rights and the work that was set into motion after World War II, it's very positive. It's the idea that we can unite together. And I appreciate all of you being there because the fine work that Joshua does, bringing people together around the world, it's really the very core of what our organization's about. Is that I'll end with a quote from Nelson Mandela that I love, which is, "Let the voices of all the people be heard." And Joshua is making that possible through events like this. And so thank you all for being here today. And I look forward to future conversations with you.
All right, Kirk, thank you very much. Alfred, closing short words?
Yes, obviously I endorse everything that Kirk has just told you. And I want to really encourage you to persevere. Don't ever lose faith. I mean, life is optimism. Don't ever let yourself slip into nihilism. You live for life, and you live for your rights and for your identity. And this gives me the opportunity to ask you as an exercise to try a different mindset, a different approach to human rights. I have been, for many years, asking other professors of international law to discard the artificial division of human rights into categories of first, second, and third generation rights, which are by themselves skewed and prejudiced. That means first generation rights, civil and political, are the only ones that really matter. The others are, well, maybe someday. It was the Vienna Conference of 1993 that said very clearly all rights are interdependent and interrelated, and there is no priority of civil and political rights over economic, social, and cultural rights. And that's why I'm asking you to think of a functional approach to human rights. Human rights as the convergence of enabling rights. Among enabling rights you have the right to food, obviously, the right to shelter, the right to a clean environment, the right to peace. That is an enabling right. Then immanent rights or inherent rights, like the right to equality and non-discrimination. Then procedural rights, like the right to access to information. You need information in order to reach your potential. You read information, and reliable information, in order to act. Due process, obviously. The right to manifest, to peacefully assemble. These are all procedural rights that are going to get you somewhere. But where do you want to go ultimately? What is the justification of this human rights edifice? I propose that the outcome right, that the most fundamental of all rights, is actually the right to be you. It's the right to your identity. You have a right to be a Laotian, to have your traditions, to have your culture, and to persevere in them. I mean, a Laotian does not need to wish to be Japanese, or to be American, or to be European. You have a great culture, and it's your identity that you want to exercise as an expression of your human dignity. You want to exercise human dignity in all its transcendence. And so think about it. Do away with first, second, and third generation rights, and consider a new paradigm of enabling rights, immanent rights, procedural rights, and outcome rights. Thank you.
All right, so that does bring us to our final phase. We have 2 more panels, but I think it might be a good time to have that, definitely a break and a stretch, and I think probably eat, and then we